The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their clinical glow across the black leather chair where Maya Santos worked, her gloved hands steady despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like old sediment. 3 years running her own shop in this neighborhood, 3 years of late nights and early mornings, of building something from nothing with nothing but her talent and the stubborn refusal to fail that had carried her through worse things than financial uncertainty. The tattoo machine buzzed in her hand, its familiar weight and vibration an extension of her own body now, as natural as breathing. She'd just finished a cover-up piece on a regular client, transforming his ex-girlfriend's name into an elaborate phoenix that spread across his shoulder blade in shades of crimson and gold, and her lower back ached from the 2 hours spent hunched over the intricate featherwork. The bell above the door chimed, pulling her attention away from cleaning her station. Maya glanced up, expecting another walk-in asking about flash designs or pricing, but the man who entered made the small shop feel suddenly smaller, as if the walls had shifted inward to accommodate his presence. He moved with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance, but from absolute certainty about his place in the world. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, touched with gray at the temples, and his face held the kind of sharp angles and strong features that would have made him striking even without the aura of controlled power that radiated from him like heat. But it was his eyes that caught her, held her attention even as her instincts whispered warnings she'd learned to trust over years of surviving in spaces where danger wore expensive cologne. Dark eyes that carried something heavy, something that looked like grief, worn smooth by time, but never truly dulled. He scanned the shop with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing threats and exits, taking in the framed artwork on the walls, her designs, her portfolio pieces, the sterilization equipment visible through the doorway to the back room, the certificates and permits displayed prominently near the counter. "We're about to close," Maya said, keeping her voice professional, neutral, "but I can schedule you for tomorrow if you want to discuss a piece." "I don't need an appointment." His voice matched everything else about him. Deep, controlled, accustomed to being obeyed. Not harsh, but absolute. "I need a cover-up, tonight." Maya straightened, stripping off her latex gloves and dropping them in the trash. She'd dealt with demanding clients before, men who thought their money or status entitled them to special treatment, who expected her to rearrange her life and schedule around their impulses. "I don't work like that. Everyone books appointments. Everyone waits their turn." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or something that might have been respect. He reached into his jacket, and Maya's hand moved instinctively toward the panic button under her counter, but he only pulled out a wallet, thick with cash. "Name your price." "It's not about money." She crossed her arms, feeling the familiar weight of her exhaustion transform into irritation. "I've been here since 10 this morning. I'm tired. My hands need rest. And I don't know you or what you want done." He stepped closer to the counter, and she could smell his cologne now. Something expensive and understated. Sandalwood, maybe, with hints of bergamot. "Vittorio Russo." He offered the name like it should mean something, like it was a key that would unlock doors. When she didn't react, didn't show recognition, another flicker of that same surprise crossed his features. "I need this done tonight, not tomorrow, not next week. I'll pay whatever you want, and I'll double it if you start now." Maya studied him, taking in the desperation that lived behind the commanding exterior, the way his jaw tightened slightly when he spoke, the tension in his shoulders beneath that expensive suit. She'd seen grief before, had worn it herself, and she recognized it in him now, despite his attempts to bury it under authority and money. "Show me," she said finally. He hesitated, the first genuine hesitation she'd seen from him, and then began unbuttoning his shirt. Maya maintained her professional composure as he shrugged out of the jacket and shirt, revealing a body that bore the evidence of a life she could only guess at. Scars that looked like knife wounds, old and silvered with time, the kind of muscle that came from discipline rather than vanity, and there, directly over his heart, the tattoo he wanted covered. Isabella. The name was rendered in elegant script, surrounded by delicate roses and a date. The kind of memorial piece Maya had done dozens of times, the kind that marked loss and love in equal measure. Below the name, more dates. A birth date and a death date, separated by only 27 years. His wife, Maya realized. His dead wife. "I've been to 4 other artists," Vittorio said, his voice carefully controlled, revealing nothing of what it cost him to stand there half-naked in front of a stranger, exposing this wound. "They all said they could do it. They all started designing cover-ups, eagles, lions, elaborate geometric patterns." He paused, and something raw flickered across his face before he locked it down again. "I couldn't go through with it, every time I walked out." Maya moved around the counter, approaching him with the clinical assessment she brought to every technical consultation, but her eyes kept returning to his face rather than the tattoo. "Why do you want it covered? That's not your concern? It is if you want me to do it." She stood close enough now to examine the tattoo properly, noting the quality of the line work, the delicate shading in the roses. "This is beautiful work, well healed, probably 5 or 6 years old, and it's positioned right over your heart. That's intentional, meaningful. So why cover it now?" His jaw worked, tension radiating from him in waves she could almost feel against her skin. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Maya thought he might put his shirt back on and walk out like he apparently had from 4 other shops. But then he spoke, and his voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten in unwanted sympathy. "Because I need to move forward. Because carrying her here," he pressed his hand flat against the tattoo, "keeps me in the past. Because she's been gone for 6 years, and I'm tired of bleeding." The rawness in those words, the naked truth of them, hit Maya harder than she wanted to admit. She'd spent 3 years building walls, keeping clients at professional distance, never letting anyone close enough to matter. But something in his voice, in the desperate control he maintained over emotions that clearly threatened to consume him, cracked something in her carefully maintained defenses. "I can't do it," she said quietly. His expression shuddered immediately, going hard and cold. "Fine. I'll find someone else." He reached for his shirt. "No, wait." Maya caught his arm without thinking, felt the warmth of his skin and the tension in his muscles beneath her fingertips. She released him immediately, stepping back. "I mean, I can't cover it tonight. Not because of money or time. I can't cover it at all." "Why not?" The question came out flat, dangerous. "Because you don't actually want it covered." Maya met his eyes, refusing to look away even though the intensity of his gaze made her want to. "You've walked out of 4 shops already. You'll walk out of mine too if I start designing something. Not because the designs are wrong, but because you're not ready." "You don't know what I'm ready for." His voice had gone low, controlled fury simmering beneath each word. "You're right, I don't. But I know grief. I know what it looks like when someone's trying to cut off a piece of themselves because they think it will hurt less than carrying it." She gestured toward the tattoo. "That's not just ink, that's your wife. That's your love for her. And covering it won't make you stop loving her. It won't make you stop grieving. It'll just make you hate the art that replaced her." Vittorio stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then, without warning, he sank into her client chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The vulnerability of the gesture, the sudden collapse of that iron control, struck Maya like a physical blow. 6 years, he said, his voice muffled. 6 years, and I still reach for her in the morning, still turn to tell her things, still. He lifted his head, and his eyes were devastatingly raw. "Everyone tells me to move on, to find someone else, to stop living in the past. So I thought, if I covered the tattoo, if I couldn't see her name every time I looked in the mirror." Maya found herself moving closer, every professional instinct screaming at her to maintain distance, even as something deeper, more human, pulled her toward this stranger's pain. You got that tattoo to honor her, to keep her close. Covering it because other people think you should move on isn't honoring anything. Not her memory, not your grief, not yourself. Then what do I do? The question came out broken. This powerful man reduced to something achingly human. How do I carry this without it destroying me? She should have stepped back then, should have maintained her professional boundaries, should have told him this wasn't her job, wasn't her place. Instead, Maya pulled over her own work stool and sat down, bringing herself to his eye level. You don't cover it, you add to it. He looked up, confusion replacing some of the raw grief. Expand the piece, Maya continued, the idea forming even as she spoke it. Keep her name, keep the roses, keep everything that honors her. But add to it. Add elements that represent moving forward while carrying her with you, not covering her up, not pretending she didn't exist, but acknowledging that your life continued, that you're building something new while still honoring what you had. Vittorio was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her face, with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every breath, every heartbeat. What would that look like? Maya stood, moving to her design desk and pulling out a sketch pad. Her exhaustion had evaporated, replaced by the creative energy that always flooded through her when she found the right concept for a piece. Tell me about her, about your life together, about what you've built since she's been gone. Another hesitation, and she thought maybe she'd pushed too far, gotten too personal. But then he started talking, and once he began, the words flowed like a dam breaking. He told her about Isabella, about meeting her when they were both 20, about the way she'd laughed, about her love of gardens and classical music, about the night she died, a car accident that had stolen her in seconds and left him with nothing but grief and rage and guilt, about the empire he'd built afterward, throwing himself into work to avoid the empty spaces she'd left behind, about his nephew, his sister's son, who'd become like his own child in the years since. Maya sketched as he talked, her pencil moving across the paper in swift, sure strokes. She added vines growing up from the existing roses, reaching toward the sky, life continuing, growing, but rooted in the foundation of what came before. She incorporated a small guardian angel tucked into the design, wings spread protectively. She wove in subtle architectural elements, towers and walls that suggested building something new, something strong. When she finally turned the sketch around to show him, Vittorio went completely still. His hand reached out, hovering over the paper without quite touching it, and Maya saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "This," he said, his voice rough, "this is what I've been trying to find." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. It'll take multiple sessions. The existing tattoo is good work, so we're building around it, not fixing anything. I'd want at least 3 sessions, maybe 4, to do this right. Whatever it takes. He looked up from the sketch to her face, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Thank you. For understanding. For not just taking my money and doing what I asked. That's not how I work. Maya set the sketch aside, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. I don't just ink skin. I help people tell their stories, process their pain, mark the moments that matter. If I'd covered that tattoo, I would have been helping you make a mistake you'd regret. Vittorio stood, reaching for his shirt. As he buttoned it, he kept glancing at the sketch, and Maya saw something in his expression that looked almost like hope. Fragile, uncertain, but present. When can we start? Give me a few days to refine the design. Then we'll do the first session, probably 3 to 4 hours. I don't book back-to-back appointments like this, so you'll need to accept a normal scheduling arrangement. A hint of a smile touched his mouth, the first she'd seen, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, less burdened. I think I can manage that. He pulled out his wallet again, extracting several bills that Maya realized were hundreds. For tonight, for your time, and for the design work. I don't charge for consultations. She pushed the money back toward him. You can pay my regular rate when we start the actual tattoo work. You stayed 2 hours past closing to talk to a stranger about his dead wife. You're getting paid. He set the money on her counter with a finality that suggested arguing would be pointless. Maya picked up the bills, counting them quickly. This is way too much. Keep it. Consider it an apology for demanding you drop everything for me. He shrugged into his jacket, and the transformation back into that commanding presence was almost complete. But not quite. Maya could still see the grief, still see the vulnerability he'd shown her, and she knew she'd never be able to unsee it. At the door, he paused. Maya Santos. He tested her name like he was committing it to memory. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. Then he was gone, the bell chiming his departure, and Maya stood alone in her shop, holding a stranger's money and feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. She looked down at the sketch of the expanded tattoo design, at the way she'd woven growth and hope into the memorial of a dead woman, and wondered what she'd just started. Maya spent 3 days refining the design, working between her regular appointments and after hours, obsessing over details in a way she usually reserved only for competition pieces or her most meaningful projects. She told herself it was just professional pride, just her commitment to doing excellent work for every client. She didn't examine too closely why she found herself thinking about Vittorio Russo at odd moments, remembering the raw grief in his eyes, the way his voice had broken when he talked about his wife, the surprising gentleness in his hands when he'd touched the sketch. When he arrived for their first session, Maya had everything prepared, her station sanitized and set up, the stencil ready, fresh needles and ink caps arranged with precise efficiency. He appeared exactly on time, wearing jeans and a simple black Henley this time, somehow looking both more approachable and equally imposing without the armor of his expensive suit. The contrast unsettled her, made him seem more real, more human, more dangerous to the walls she'd built around herself. Ready? She asked, gesturing to the chair. He nodded, already pulling off his shirt. Maya tried to maintain her professional detachment, tried to see only the canvas of skin and existing tattoo she'd be working with, but she was acutely aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with clinical assessment. The strength evident in his shoulders and chest, the scattered scars that told stories she'd probably never hear, the way his muscles shifted as he settled into the chair. This is going to take a while, she said, focusing on prepping his skin, on the familiar ritual of her craft. 3 to 4 hours today for the vine work and the initial shading on the angel. Tell me if you need breaks. I can handle pain. Maya almost smiled at that. Everyone says that. Everyone eventually needs breaks. She applied the stencil, carefully positioning the new elements to flow naturally from the existing tattoo. Isabella's name would remain untouched, still centered over his heart, but now it would be cradled in growth rather than standing alone in stark memorial. When she was satisfied with the placement, she picked up her machine and began. The first line she drew made him tense slightly, not from pain, she thought, but from the significance of what they were doing, adding to his wife's memorial, transforming it into something that acknowledged both his past and his future. Maya worked in focused silence for the first 20 minutes, establishing the initial framework of the vines, letting him adjust to the sensation and the meaning of what was happening. Tell me about your shop, Vittorio said eventually, his voice steady despite the constant buzz of the machine and the needle marking his skin. How long you've been doing this? Maya debated deflecting. She usually kept conversations with clients superficial, professional, but something about him, about the vulnerability he'd shown her in their first meeting, made her want to reciprocate. 3 years here. I apprenticed for 5 years before that, worked in other people's shops until I could afford my own place. That's young to own a business. I'm 28, not that young. She wiped away excess ink, evaluating her work before continuing the line. But yeah, it was a risk. Most people told me to wait, to save more money, to work under someone else for a few more years. I couldn't wait. I needed something that was mine, that no one could take away from me. There was a weight to those last words that she hadn't intended, and she felt Vittorio's gaze on her face, studying her with the same intensity he'd brought to their first meeting. Someone tried to take things from you. It wasn't a question. Maya kept her eyes on her work, on the precise placement of each needle, and decided that if he could be honest about his pain, maybe she could acknowledge hers. My ex. He was controlling, wanted to dictate everything, where I worked, who I saw, how I spent my money. When I left him, I promised myself I'd never be in a position where someone else had that kind of power over my life again. The silence that followed felt charged, heavy with understanding. When Vittorio spoke again, his voice was careful, deliberate. That takes strength. Leaving, rebuilding. So does grieving. So does standing in a tattoo shop and admitting you're not ready to let go. Maya switched to a finer needle, beginning the delicate detail work on the leaves. We've both survived things. We're both still surviving them. Is that what this is? Survival? His hand moved, almost touching the spot where she was working, then dropping back to his lap. Sometimes I think I'm just going through motions. Building things, making decisions, maintaining control, but not actually living. Maya paused, meeting his eyes. You're here, aren't you? Doing something painful because you want to heal, want to move forward. That's more than going through motions. Something shifted in his expression, a softening she hadn't seen before. My nephew, Alessandro, he's 16 now. I've been raising him since his mother, my sister, died 4 years ago. Car accident, like Isabella. He spoke the words carefully, like handling fragile glass. He asked me last month why I never dated, never even seemed interested in anyone. I told him I was busy with work. He said I was hiding. Kids are brutally honest. He was right. Vittorio shifted slightly in the chair, and Maya instinctively adjusted her hand to maintain contact with his skin. I've been hiding behind grief, behind work, behind the idea that loving someone again would be betraying Isabella's memory. But watching Alessandro grow up, seeing him start dating, take risks, live his life, I realized I've been modeling fear for him, teaching him that loss means shutting down. Maya found herself drawn into his words, into the raw honesty of them. She worked automatically, her hands knowing what to do while her mind focused on him. So this tattoo, expanding it rather than covering it, that's about showing him you can honor the past while still being open to the future? Maybe. Or maybe it's about finally admitting to myself that Isabella wouldn't want me frozen in place. She loved fiercely, lived fully. She'd hate knowing I've spent 6 years just existing. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. The guilt of moving on feels like I'm killing her all over again. But staying stuck feels like killing myself. The depth of that confession, the trust it represented, made Maya's chest tighten. She stopped working, setting down her machine and meeting his eyes directly. You're not killing her by living. You're honoring her by refusing to let grief destroy the man she loved. That's what this tattoo means. She's still part of you, still over your heart. But you're growing around that grief, instead of being consumed by it. Vittorio reached up, his hand covering hers where it rested on his chest. The gesture was intimate without being sexual, a connection that acknowledged the emotional territory they'd entered. His skin was warm under her palm, his heartbeat steady and strong, and Maya knew she should pull away, but couldn't make herself move. How did you get so wise about grief? He asked softly. My mother. The words came out before Maya could stop them, before she could retreat behind professional boundaries. She died when I was 23. Cancer. It was brutal. Watching her fade, watching her fight, watching her finally give up because the fight was too hard, and then having to figure out how to be a person in a world that didn't include her anymore. His hand tightened slightly on hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture of comfort that felt entirely natural despite them being virtual strangers. I'm sorry. Me too, for your losses, for all of us who have to learn how to carry grief and still function. Maya finally pulled her hand back, needing the distance to regain her equilibrium. We should keep working. This is going to take the full 4 hours if we want to finish the vine structure today. He nodded, settling back into the chair, but something had changed between them. The air felt different, charged, intimate, dangerous. Maya picked up her machine and returned to the tattoo, but she was hyper-aware of every point of contact, every breath, every subtle shift in his body as she worked. They fell into a rhythm over the next 2 hours, talking intermittently about safer topics. His nephew's obsession with architecture, her love of botanical illustration, the neighborhood where her shop was located. But underneath the surface conversation, Maya felt the connection deepening, felt herself being drawn toward this man in ways that terrified her. She'd sworn off relationships after escaping her ex, sworn off letting anyone close, enough to hurt her, control her, diminish her. She'd built her life around independence, around self-sufficiency, around the idea that she was enough on her own. But something about Vittorio challenged that, not by demanding anything, not by trying to control or possess, but simply by being present, by being honest, by showing his own vulnerability without shame. When she finally finished the vine work and the base layer of the angel, Maya stepped back to evaluate the full piece. The new elements flowed naturally from the existing tattoo, transforming Isabella's memorial from something static into something living, growing. The angel she'd added was subtle, its wings spread protectively around the name, suggesting both guardianship and release. Look, she said, holding up a mirror so he could see. Vittorio studied the reflection in silence, his expression unreadable. Maya held her breath, suddenly uncertain despite her professional confidence. What if she'd misunderstood what he needed? What if the addition felt wrong, felt like a violation of the original memorial? Then she saw his eyes fill, saw him blink rapidly and swallow hard, his jaw working with the effort of maintaining control. It's perfect, he said, his voice rough. It's exactly what I couldn't articulate. She's still there, still central. But there's possibility now. Growth. Future. Relief and something warmer flooded through Maya. 2 more sessions. One to finish the shading and add detail to the angel. Another to complete the background elements and tie everything together. Maya. He caught her hand again as she started cleaning her station, and this time the contact felt different, more deliberate, charged with something beyond shared grief and understanding. Thank you. Not just for the tattoo, for seeing what I needed when I didn't. She should have pulled away, should have maintained professional distance, should have remembered all the reasons she'd sworn off letting anyone matter. Instead, she squeezed his hand back, acknowledging what they both felt building between them. Attraction, yes, but more than that. Recognition, understanding, the sense of seeing and being seen in ways that went beyond surface interactions. I'll book your next appointment before you leave, she said finally, gently extracting her hand and busying herself with cleaning up. Give this 2 weeks to heal properly before we do more work. He stood, pulling his shirt back on with care around the fresh tattoo. At the counter, as she wrote out aftercare instructions and scheduled his next session, he spoke again. Can I take you to dinner? Maya's hand stilled on the appointment card. That's not, I know, crossing professional boundaries. I don't usually do this. I don't date. Haven't since Isabella. But you, he paused, searching for words. You've seen parts of me no one else has. And I want to know you beyond these appointments. If you're willing. Every self-protective, Instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain boundaries, to protect herself from the risk of caring. But Maya thought about what she'd told him about the tattoo, about honoring the past while being open to the future, about refusing to let fear keep you frozen. She thought about Alessandro watching his uncle hide from life, and about her own patterns of self-protection that were starting to feel more like self-imprisonment. One dinner, she heard herself say, but I picked the place, and we split the check. Equal footing. Vittorio smiled. A real smile this time, bright and transformative. Deal. The dinner turned into coffee the next week, which turned into a walk through the botanical gardens on Maya's rare day off. Between his second and third tattoo sessions, they fell into a pattern of seeing each other outside the shop, always at Maya's instigation, always with her controlling the terms and timing. Vittorio never pushed, never demanded, seemed content to follow her lead and accept whatever she was willing to offer. It was that restraint, that patience, that started breaking down Maya's walls more effectively than any aggressive pursuit could have. He had power. She'd learned enough about his world to understand the extent of it, the morally gray nature of his business empire. But he never used that power to pressure her. He asked questions and listened to her answers. He shared his own struggles with grief and guilt without expecting her to fix them. He introduced her to Alessandro, who was brilliant and funny and clearly adored his uncle. By the time Vittorio returned for his third session, Maya had admitted to herself that she was falling for him. It terrified her. Every instinct honed during her relationship with her controlling ex screamed warnings. Don't trust, don't depend, don't let anyone close enough to hurt you. But Vittorio wasn't her ex. He didn't try to dictate her choices or control her independence. He celebrated her strength, her stubbornness, her fierce commitment to self-sufficiency. Last session, Maya said as he settled into her chair, and she heard the regret in her own voice. Once this tattoo was complete, they'd have no built-in reason to see each other. The relationship would have to stand on its own, without the structure of these appointments. We could always start another piece, Vittorio suggested, and she could hear the same reluctance in his tone. Maya smiled despite her nerves. Let's finish this one first. She worked on the final details. Subtle shading that gave depth to the vines, delicate highlights on the angel's wings, background elements that tied the entire piece together into a cohesive whole. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced every time Vittorio shifted slightly under her touch, every time their eyes met during breaks. I need to tell you something, he said about halfway through the session. About my world, about what I do. Maya had known this conversation was coming. She'd avoided asking directly, had accepted the vague descriptions of business interests and security consulting without pushing for details. But she'd seen enough. The deference people showed him in public, the edge of danger that clung to him, the scars on his body that told stories of violence. To know the truth was darker than surface explanations. You don't have to. I do. His voice was firm, resolute. If we're doing this, if we're really trying to build something, you need to know who I am. All of it. Maya set down her machine, giving him her full attention. Vittorio didn't sugarcoat it. He told her about his family's organization, about the businesses that operated in legal gray areas and sometimes crossed into illegal territory, about the violence that was sometimes necessary to protect his interests and his people. He told her about enemies, about threats, about the constant need to maintain control and project strength because any perceived weakness would be exploited. I'm not asking you to be part of that world, he said. I keep that separate from my personal life as much as possible. But you deserve to know what you'd be getting into if you choose this. Choose me. It's dangerous. People have gotten hurt because of their connection to me. I would protect you with everything I have, but I can't guarantee your safety completely. Maya processed his words, feeling the weight of them, the trust it took to lay out the truth so starkly. Why are you telling me this? You know it might make me walk away. Because you deserve the choice. Because if you're with me, It has to be with full knowledge of what that means. He reached up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. And because I'm falling in love with you, Maya, I didn't think I could feel this again. Didn't think I deserved to. But you've made me believe in possibilities I thought I'd buried with Isabella. The declaration hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath. Every fear, every self-protective instinct warred with the overwhelming feeling in her chest. The recognition that she was falling too. That maybe she'd been falling since that first night when he'd shown her his grief and his vulnerability. I'm terrified, she admitted, of caring this much, of depending on someone. My ex made me feel small, made me doubt myself, tried to control everything. I spent 3 years building a life where I didn't need anyone, where I was safe because I was alone. I don't want to make you small. I want to see you become everything you're meant to be. Vittorio's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And you'll never be safe because you're alone. You'll just be isolated. There's a difference between independence and exile. Maya closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite her fears. What if I can't do this? What if I'm too damaged, too afraid? Then we figure it out together, at your pace, on your terms. His voice was steady, certain. I've spent 6 years being afraid of moving forward, of betraying Isabella's memory by living again. You showed me that honoring the past doesn't mean staying frozen in it. Let me show you that protecting yourself doesn't mean never letting anyone in. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, seeing the hope and fear and love there. It mirrored everything in her own heart, the longing for connection, the terror of vulnerability, the desperate desire to believe in possibilities. I need to finish this tattoo, she said finally, pulling back just enough to pick up her machine again. Then we can talk about what happens next. Vittorio settled back into the chair, but his hand found hers, squeezing once before releasing. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Maya worked on the final details with hands that trembled slightly, her mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. She thought about the life she'd built. Safe, controlled, solitary. She thought about the nights she spent alone in her apartment above the shop, telling herself she was independent when really she was just lonely. She thought about the way Vittorio looked at her, like she was something precious and strong simultaneously, like her sharp edges and fierce independence were things to be celebrated rather than smoothed away. She thought about Isabella, about a woman who'd loved fiercely, who'd lived fully, whose death had left a mark so deep that 6 years later it still shaped the man who'd survived her. And she thought about what that woman might say to her if she could, whether she'd want Vittorio frozen in grief, or whether she'd want him to find love again, find life again. When Maya finally stepped back to examine the completed tattoo, the sight of it made her throat tighten. Isabella's name remained centered over Vittorio's heart, but now it was cradled in life, in vines that reached upward toward possibility, in the protective wings of an angel that suggested both guardianship and release, in the subtle architectural elements that spoke of building something new. It was beautiful and painful and hopeful all at once. Done, she said softly. Vittorio looked in the mirror, and she saw tears slip down his cheeks despite his attempts to control them. It's perfect. She's still here, but I can move forward. You understood exactly what I needed. We understood each other. Maya cleaned the tattoo gently, applying the final protective covering. We both needed to learn that moving forward doesn't mean abandoning the past. It means carrying it with us, while still being open to whatever comes next. When she finished the aftercare and gave him the final instructions, they stood facing each other in the quiet shop. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows and golden illumination, and Maya felt suspended in a moment that would define everything that came after. So, Vittorio said, his voice careful, what happens next? Maya thought about all her fears, all her carefully constructed walls, all the reasons she'd given herself for staying safe and alone. Then she thought about the way he'd trusted her with his grief, the way he'd been patient with her pace, the way he'd laid out the risks and dangers without minimizing them or pressuring her. She thought about Alessandro growing up watching his uncle hide from life, and about her own future stretching out in safe, lonely isolation if she let fear keep her frozen. Next, she said, stepping closer to him, you take me to dinner, and then maybe we figure out how two people who are both terrified of vulnerability can build something together. Slowly, carefully, but together. Vittorio's smile was brilliant, transformative, and when he pulled her into his arms, Maya let herself fall into the embrace. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and she could feel the new tattoo through the thin barrier of his shirt. Isabella's name over his heart, surrounded by growth and possibility and hope. I'm still going to be stubborn, she warned, her voice muffled against his chest. I'm still going to need my independence. I'm still going to be difficult. Good! His arms tightened around her. I don't want easy. I want real. I want you, exactly as you are. Sharp edges, fierce independence, stubborn strength and all. Maya pulled back just enough to look up at him. And I want you, grief, guilt, dangerous world, and all. But if you ever try to control me, ever try to make my decisions for me, ever make me feel small, I'm gone. I don't care how much I love you. Deal. He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her mouth, soft, gentle, full of promise. We'll figure this out together, on your terms, at your pace. She kissed him back, feeling the last of her walls crumble, feeling terrified and exhilarated and hopeful all at once. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the transformation happening in this small tattoo shop. But in this moment, wrapped in Vittorio's arms, with the evidence of their shared journey etched into his skin, Maya let herself believe in possibilities she thought she'd given up on. She thought Isabella would understand. This woman who'd loved fiercely and lived fully, who'd left such a mark on the world that her absence still echoed 6 years later. Maya hoped Isabella would be glad that her name would remain over Vittorio's heart, even as he opened himself to love again, that she'd approve of this new woman who valued his strength but also saw his vulnerability, who would stand beside him without being diminished by him. Thank you, Vittorio whispered against her hair, for seeing me, for understanding, for being brave enough to try. Thank you, Maya whispered back, for being patient, for not pushing, for showing me that letting someone in doesn't mean losing myself. They stood together as the evening deepened into night, two people who'd survived loss and pain and fear, learning to be vulnerable again, learning to trust again, learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart to possibility, despite all the reasons not to. The tattoo over Vittorio's heart represented both past and future, a memorial to enduring love and a symbol of the courage to love again. And in that small shop, where grief had transformed into hope, where isolation had given way to connection, Maya and Vittorio began building something new, while honoring what they'd both survived.